Welcome back, people of the web. You've just come across a very special episode of Intelligence's Dumpstat, the series where I, Daniel of Driving and Dragons, cover the most mentally painful instances of stupidity in the TTRPG world for the week. Why is this week special? Well, this is episode number 3 of Intelligence's Dumpstat, and 3 is traditionally the absolute lowest base intelligence score that can be rolled in the standard D20 system games. So, who is the subject of the day we celebrate the lowest score ever dumped into intelligence? Is it the basic expert with his sad violin music and somber tone explaining how heavy his burden of being the only person who could ever conceivably be correct about the rules of D&D Basic or the application of Rule 0? How about Jeffro Johnson and the Bro SR, speaking directly from their collective anus about how the original designers of the games have never played the games and clearly don't know what they intended when they wrote the rules for their games in the books that they published, often before most of the bros were an itch in their father's ballsack? Is it another Watsy shill, failed cosplayer, or Seattle activist that was hired as a consultant, vomiting out a world salad of ists and phobes as the only possible motivations to criticize D&D 2024? No.
It's me, Austin!
Oh, son of a bitch!
What? It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
That's right. For good or ill, this week I used intelligence as a dump stat. Either because I went in with very low expectations, expecting that anything made by Stephen Saunders, better known as the chess pigeon himself, Condor DM, to be a burning dumpster fire, only to be made to eat a helping plate of crow, or because I went in to do a first impressions review of his brand new D100 based Neo TTRPG system, despite knowing full well that based on his previous history, it would be an 1,125 pages of brain-injuring hell and time I'd never get back. Either way, I'm either an idiot for doubting the man based on the idiocy he spews 9 to 10 times a day to his 2 actual followers, or I'm an idiot for expecting anything different given the volume of evidence available. So we all know now, I pissed on the $35 electric fence, and it's time to see exactly which way it shocked me. All kidding aside, I have the PDF version of his complete game system and his Skullhorn setting. It is 1,125 pages long with no art whatsoever in the document. That is not hyperbole. I set out to give it a fair and honest review, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Yes, I want there to be some entertainment factor here, but I gave the same chance that I would give to anyone who asked me to review a game. For the record, Stephen didn't ask. This isn't like when Spirit Bear Studios asked me to review their Colonies and Conquerors game and sent me the PDFs to look over. I will link them in the description, by the way. It's an interesting system set in an oft overlooked time period, and I'd like to see what would happen if they sold enough to clean up their actual product, because the game deserves a professional layout and some solid art and editing. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, I guess, I cannot say the same for Condor's game. In fact, calling it a game system is almost a fabrication in and of itself. Systems imply some kind of structure and a certain level of organization, which is something that Stephen's rulebook absolutely does not have. Speaking of, if I don't get some structure to this review, the video will take an hour or more. So let's take it from the top. Back when I ran MMA Gospel, a mixed martial arts news and opinion site, we did our event recaps using a format everyone should recognize, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are some neutral, don't move the needle kind of things, but sure there are. But honestly, that's where I like to lean in on the bad. If I went out and did something and it just doesn't really stick out, it's bad because wasted your time and wasted your effort and didn't make any real progress. So that to me is kind of bad. Just for fun, I'll do this review like this. We'll have the Condor, the Clown Door, and the chess pigeon. Just a reminder, this is a first look review. I will playtest this system to give it an actual test drive if I can find players who don't burn the book and then burn me at the stake just for asking. It may sound like a half-dying Yugo and look like one of those hideous Jeep Gladiator trucks, but from what we all know right now, it may ride like a Rolls Royce. Right, so on to the Condor. There isn't much. I want to find the good in this system, but it is so increasingly difficult to find. He does do something that a lot of game designers, especially indie designers, fail to even attempt, and that deserves credit. He describes what a TTRPG is, how it's supposed to work in general, what a player and a game master are, and what we mean when we say something like D10, D12, and how to use 2D10s as a stand-in for a D100, and several other TTRPG game elements that most indie designers frankly take for granted. When I started writing my 3612 system, I gave the rule book to a woman I knew who had kids in their early teens and absolutely no experience or interest in TTRPGs. And I told her, please read this and tell me if you think you could play this game or teach it to your children with any confidence. I wanted to know that I hadn't missed the forest of potential customers because I was surrounded by the trees of people who were already in the hobby that I would normally talk to games about. Stephen did this. Did he do it well? Not really. But he made the attempt, and that's more than I've seen, even from respected indie designers at times. Another point for the Condor section. His game world is not complete trash. Is it derivative? Sure, but what isn't? What's hilariously ironic is that the only way a world builder seems to be able to escape the dreaded, this world is derivative, it's heavily inspired by, if not straight up copied from XYZ label, is to make it historical fiction set in the literal real world. Apparently it isn't derivative to copy a history textbook, but it is derivative to be even remotely similar to anything that's come from somebody else before. His setting has some interesting concepts and dynamics that could make for a fun sandbox to build castles in. He uses a multi-level polytheistic world that seems to keep enough distance to allow for a lack of faith to be plausible and enough separation between the progenitor gods and their successors to allow for old religions to be seen as false or not connected. His races, called Volcana, they do have some atypical, if not unique, elements that will separate his setting from the typical Dungeons and Dragons copy-paste that's found in most indie TTRPGs. His gambling roles mechanic and character creation is also something clever that has been done before, but not presented as such in any rules that I've seen. Basically, if you don't like an ability score roll in character creation, you have 2 chances to gamble on a reroll, but you always have to take whatever the new roll is. So you can't roll 3 times and just pick the best. Probably the last good thing that I can put here in the Condor section is that he did create a completely bespoke game. It isn't a clone or a copy or a homebrew version or some other iteration of an established game. It isn't a mashup that's part OSR, part 5e, and part Call of Cthulhu. We need more of that in TTRPGs. More systems that are designed to accommodate more playstyles. Yes, that is a risk from a business perspective. It is the same reason that edition changes always lose a significant chunk of a player base. Most people cannot be bothered to take a risk on learning an entirely new system with their limited free time. But if you ask me, I am sick to death of people griping about how poorly a system handles something, but then only go out and buy copycats of the same system that they complain about. All right, so that is basically all the positivity you will find in this review. I wish I could say I'm surprised here, but I'm not. It really is a half-baked idea that has been served undercooked. On to the clown door. This is a cheap as hell rush job. He claims he spent something like 9 years on this, and I absolutely cannot see it. The layout is like a transcript from one of his YouTube videos, a repetitive, rambling stream of consciousness that often contradicts itself. Editing is non-existent. The entire document is filled with situations where he clearly forgot to substitute terms used in older drafts for the final terms that he chose to incorporate. To say he didn't put any effort into the layout is beyond an understatement. Repeatedly, he uses examples that rely on having already read information several chapters ahead of where he's trying to make his point. He puts together a quick step-by-step on creating a new character and then proceeds to put the chapters on how to do those things in a different order. It's 1,125 pages with no art. If you took all the art that he had included in the separate download, added it to the rulebook, and laid it out properly, it could easily be half of that length. This is very basic, simple stuff. If you are going to be too lazy to work on the product yourself, for God's sake, pay somebody who knows what they're doing to do it for you. It looks like he typed it into Notepad and just sent it on to DriveThruRPG. Even when I say chapters, I'm lying to you, because it doesn't even have chapters. Even worse, it is supposed to be a rule book that neutrally lays out a system to build your own game off of, while you pay extra to get the Skullhorn setting. But the system constantly references the Skullhorn material and doesn't lay out how you are supposed to create your own races or classes with any detail. If I bought just the system document because I was going to play my own world, I'd feel cheated. Cheated into needing to buy his setting just to get a somewhat decent chance to scrape the necessary examples and info to create my own game. The final item in our clown door section is the art. Where to start? It is all AI, except for a map that he apparently made on Microsoft Paint in the early 2000s. Again, this is not hyperbole. On page 519, that's right, 500 fucking pages in, he writes this. Quote, nowadays, making a map or finding one you can use in the world of Skullhorn is easy. I won't provide you some fancy map. I am not going to provide a map and tell you how to use it. I will provide one I made online decades ago when I was younger and I used it for many years. Glaze Island is one of many places you will find on planet Skullhorn. You won't find the map here. It will come with your purchase separate from the PDF. No extra charge, of course. I hope you get a lot of use out of it. Well, aside from the fact that there's a lot of typos and other things that he might have possibly caught if he bothered to edit this, well, for $35, you damned well better provide me with some fancy map, you asshole. You essentially just told any customer, you conned into buying this heap. Look, dude, you want to make a map that doesn't look like toddlers scribbled it? Incarnate has a 30-day trial. As for other art, I have absolutely no issue with small indie creators using AI to keep costs down. I've said it before, AI is the great equalizer that allows small self-publishers to compete with the big boys on a much more level playing field. But if you're going to use AI art, pay to get the watermarks removed. Clown Door must have used his daily free tokens on at least 5 separate AI art programs for a month to get these images without paying for them. It shows in the images too, because they're filled with all the errors that AI art memes hammer on. Eyes in weird places, extra arms that come from nowhere, legs that end in hands, the works. The fact that old Steven has the balls to charge people for this when he was obviously unwilling to invest a dime into making a better product is simply insulting. So no layout, awful AI art, telling a paying customer that if they want a decent map, they need to finish the book for them, for him. An independent system that has a rule book totally reliant on your personal settings sold separately. I mean, how does this get any worse? Buckle up, because here comes the chess pigeon section. This game has so many glaring errors right there in the text that I will be shocked if it's even playable. Balance is an overrated concept in TTRPGs. People get online and obsess about every class being equally powerful individually and every challenge designed for a specific level to play out with equal difficulty regardless of party composition. I'm not going to get into it because that's a whole nother video all on its own. But suffice it to say that TTRPG characters should be balanced in their role as a piece of a party that is then balanced against the challenges faced, and even then only loosely balanced. Chess Pigeon DM took this concept way too far. Some of his races and classes are just objectively worse than other options, and not to a small extent either. I'm talking about one race getting a plus 10 to an ability score, minus 10 to another of the player's choice, and plus 20 magic resistance, while the next race in the book gets minus 10 to 2 ability scores and minus 10 to resisting a specific damage type. That is one race with the ability to customize where his drawback is in exchange for plus 30 in bonuses, versus a race that simply has minus 30 in penalties. You think that's bad? How about the fact that there is a roughly 5% chance, without the gambling mechanic, that you roll a character who cannot qualify to play as any class at all? Yes, the classes have ability score requirements. For instance, to qualify as the base warrior class, a character must have a 64 in either strength or agility. You roll stats with a D100. There's a 4.4% chance that on 7 D100s, you end up with not a single score that is 64 or higher. There should never, under any circumstances, be any chance, let alone a 1 in 20 chance, that your ability score rolls effectively disqualify a player's character from the game. Chess Pigeon DM also has decided that $35 a pop isn't enough money for him to create tables. That's right, you heard me. There are absolutely no tables in this book. All content that should be in a neat, readable table is simply listed out in raw text, separated with line breaks. And it probably accounts for, I shit you not, 450 to 500 pages of bloat. Even worse, for a guy who hates the Bro SR so much and is very much a narrative game master, he sure does have a ton of what should be tables in this book. If he had bothered to actually compile the information into tables, there would be dozens of them. The entire combat system is based on rolling against target numbers found on what should be tables. The ability check system is also entirely on what should be tables. However, there are no tables, which would make this game a nightmare to run. Added to that, there's no index. The document just abruptly ends after the last monster entry. The table of contents is bare bones, and I'd mentioned how it doesn't list any page numbers, but the book has no page numbers. Looking up all the various 2-hit and damage reduction and weapon proficiency tables in this game would be a game-killing exercise in frustration. Think about it. You need one specific piece of information in a book with 1,125 unnumbered pages with a table of contents that is as generic as it gets and with no actual tables to clearly separate the data you need from the rest of the text in there. And you need the table for the appropriate kind of weapon versus the appropriate kind of armor, as well as the appropriate proficiency levels for the appropriate classes. Every single action in combat is going to become a data mining operation. This is not a game. This is a disorganized, unstructured brainstorming session for ideas for a game dumped on top of a D&D setting that has been through God only knows how many retcons, revisions, and iterations. Someone else bought this PDF and shared it with me to review it. So even without spending a dime on it, I feel ripped off. If I'd paid $35 for this, I'd have to book some plane tickets to Nova Scotia so I could shove my foot into the same place that Condor apparently keeps his head. Regardless, I'm the one who used intelligence as a dump stat this week because I sat down to read this pile of kindling expecting it to not physically harm my brain. I honestly hoped there would be something here, at least a playable game buried in there somewhere, but there isn't. Save your money. It would be better spent burning in the parking lot. At least then you could use it to warm your hands. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.